Tere tulemast. Good evening, everyone. This evening, I'm not going to have a big, long introduction because Scott's going to do that himself. But there's a few important points, I think, that everyone should be aware of. First of all, Scott was one of those very lucky individuals who was Estonianized very early, at a very early age. And you may wonder how did that happen? Well, he grew up in Hutchinson, Kansas, in the US of A. That's a good Estonian name, Hutchinson. But when he, in his very early and formative years, he was very good friends with the Tamm family. And he was very good friends with the Tamm children. And at a very early age, he was drafted into the ELO. No, not the Electric Light Orchestra. The Estonian Liberation Organization. They wore T-shirts, Väliseestlased. They planned military maneuvers on how to free Estonia. This was all before he was a teenager. And since then, I think Scott brings a very interesting perspective on not only being an Estonian, but how he sees Estonia, because he's lived there for the last 16 years of his life. Scott has a very interesting career. He's a journalist, opera, librettist. He's also a fanatical fisherman. And I can say that Scott is the person who introduced me to fly fishing in Estonia. I've been fishing with Scott on the Valga Jõgi, not far from Tallinn. So the very first time I went fly fishing, I went with Scott. So that's my introduction, short and sweet. I'll let Scott do the rest of the introduction. So please give a warm welcome to Scott Diel.
Thank you. It's on, yes? Okay. I was told this is informal, so I didn't wear a necktie. And so we can just keep it informal in the sense that if you have any questions, just interrupt me. Hopefully I won't say something that you constantly agree with, but maybe it'll be something you can disagree with. And so if you want to argue, that's okay too. I think I'm going to have to walk here to turn the slides. But my topic is, I have kind of a, is it too loud, Tavi? Is it okay? It's okay? Okay. I first arrived in Estonia in 1992. You're probably familiar with something called the U.S. Peace Corps. Well, in the late 80s, I worked in New York City. I worked in advertising, and I knew it wasn't going to be my home forever. And the U.S. Peace Corps started advertising something they called the Business Peace Corps. They said, if you join this Business Peace Corps, you won't have to go to Africa and get malaria. You won't be bitten by a poisonous snake, probably, and you won't have to teach someone to dig toilets. So I had this academic background and a little work experience that matched up with what they wanted, and they agreed to send me to Russia. Because as a kid, I'm 49 years old, I wanted to know what was behind the Iron Curtain. And they said, well, if you don't want to go to Russia, we can send you to Estonia, and you can go 6 months earlier. And well, I had a relationship I wanted to get out of. if I'm completely honest, and 6 months sounded pretty good. I knew that the standard of living in Estonia was much higher. I knew the Taarm family, and so I said, okay, let's do it. Let's go to Estonia. And so I wound up there, but I have no blood ties to Estonia. At the moment, I have no significant portion of my income that comes from Estonia. I won't walk around too much, make you dizzy with the camera. Remind me if I stray. And all this is to say that I have no reason to lie to you. And I am therefore the most objective person who could possibly speak to you on Estonia. So whatever I say, just take it as fact. Okay? My basic CV, I'm 49 years old, the classic American kid who took too many student loans. I worked in advertising until year 2000. I worked in these cities. I worked all around the Baltics. I worked in Ukraine, Belarus. For me, this was a great big adventure. And the region kept pulling me back. This is my third time to live there. The first time I came for adventure. Second time I came for money because they used to pay you in envelopes. And if anyone here is an American citizen, you know taxes can be sometimes high. Okay, not like Estonia, but Americans, we think all taxes are too much. But since 2000, I've supported myself as a freelance writer. And freelance writer, what does that mean? Well, my brother has a t-shirt that says, "We'll write for food." And that's kind of been my motto, that if it pays a good bottle of whiskey, then it's okay. And so I edited a magazine for several years called City Paper until that went kaput. I was they call it a käivitaja, which is like the starting guy, but not the founder. I don't know that a word that specific exists in English. But I did that for Forbes Estonia in the Estonian language, and I did it for ERR News, public broadcasting in English. And then I've written for a whole bunch of literary journals you've never heard of. And most recently, I've done a couple of operas. And the reason I show you this is a shameless, self-serving moment. Let me qualify that. This is a guy named Eugene Bierman. He's a Juilliard-trained composer. His parents are from Moscow. He was born in Latvia. Now he lives in Oxford. Eugene and I did this opera, which wasn't an opera, but the press wanted to call it an opera, so we said okay. But it became known as the austerity opera. And this was about the debate, austerity versus stimulus, personified by Ilves versus Krugman. So we did that, and the reason I show you this, and this is the really shameless, self-serving moment, we have a new one coming out in 2016. This is the Helsinki Chamber Choir. We've agreed with them that they will tour the United States. It's being financed by some guys called the Rabbit Island Foundation, just some rich people who bought an island and now invite artists to go live on that island. I'm going because they have lake trout this big. But here's the shameless bit. If you happen to be connected to the Finnish community, this has nothing to do with Estonia, I regret to say, but if you happen to be connected to the music community or the Finnish community, let me know, because I would just be an idiot if I didn't appeal to 50 influential people in one room, because we're interested in bringing it to the coasts as well. We already have the Midwest lined up. Okay, enough about me. My Estonian street creds, räägin eesti keelt loomulikult kõva aktsentiga. But I married an Estonian. I built a house. It was the first straw bale house ever built in Estonia. Somebody set it on fire within the first 3 months. And I worked in the government. I witnessed amazing government corruption, people selling Makarov pistols and bulletproof vests. This guy shows up one day, he gives me a bulletproof vest. He was a deputy to the governor. Puts a bulletproof vest on, takes my picture, because I wanted to send it to my mom. How many times in your life do you wear a bulletproof vest? Well, maybe after 9/11 you wear one a lot, but in those days we hadn't. And this guy wanted my help selling these to the West. And I said, well, why can't you sell them? He said, well, nobody I know wants them because it's like Soviet technology. But I also witnessed great acts of charity and generosity on the side of government as well. So I don't want to leave you with the impression that it's negative. Anyway, I've been arrested in Russia, and only last year, and this is really bizarre because Estonia is safer than most cities in the United States. A mafia chieftain who turned out to be my neighbor, I didn't know this, he got chased into my yard by two guys with big sticks, and we saved him. But anyway, so I guess my point through this is I've suffered enough in Estonia, and now suffering, that's probably too much, but I've been ready to leave it a couple of times, and I probably would have if my wife didn't dislike living in the US so much. So anyway, but that's another story. Canada is perfect. Canadians are like Americans, but nicer. And you have better health care, right? But basically what I'm going to talk about today, and these are my conclusions, and this is what I'm going to try to argue for, maybe successfully, maybe not. But I think that the relationship of foreign Estonians to Estonia has changed since 1991, without a doubt. I think today in Estonia there are these silos. We have these funny, often absurd groupings of people. We have Kodu-Eestlased, Väliseestlased, Välismaalased, and this may be grammatically incorrect, but venekeelse kõnelevad eestlased. And they can think of categories for everybody. But I'll also argue that Estonia has two great untapped resources. And one of those is Russian-speaking Estonians, and the other, I think, is foreign Estonians. And if you could tap these, if you could mobilize them, I think that this would mean a great deal for Kodu-Eestlased. And so that I don't really like people who present and just present problems because, well, that's no fun, that's just depressing. So I'll offer you a solution as well. And so if some of the slides are a bit depressing, trust me that I will rally you in a Martin Luther King-style moment where we all raise the flag and charge out of here on a positive note. I'd like to make about 4 points about the other Estonia. I don't know what kind of press you read about Estonia. I don't know what's presented here in the newspapers, and I don't know if you get a Google feed of Estonian news, but mostly what we hear about is Estonia or E-Estonia. And that's all well and good, and that's actually pretty cool. But there's a lot of things that we don't hear about, and I'd like to talk briefly about those. First, the economic prospects, they're not so rosy. It's a weird brand of capitalism right now in Estonia. Maybe it has been weird since 1992. You know, maybe it's moving toward normal, whatever normal is. But the prices are pretty crazy in some senses. An espresso costs €2, and that's not in the old town, just anywhere. An espresso in Portugal, whose median salary is only slightly lower than in Estonia, the espresso is 70 cents. That's my Big Mac index. At the VEMU traffic circle, if you all know where the VEMU traffic circle is, if you don't, VEMU is like the rich suburb of Tallinn. There's going to be 5 big supermarkets all around this one traffic circle. Estonians can't figure it out. I can't figure it out. You know, you may have some theories, but one economist told me, he said, well, the system is that we all take huge margins and we sort of just trade customers, but nobody goes bankrupt. And sort of, it's not a cartel agreement, but sort of there's an understanding that nobody's going to be Sam Walton and nobody's going to go in and offer things just over cost and do lots of volume. Is that true or not? I have no idea, but it makes logical sense. The E-based economy, I think it's a really cool idea, and somebody has to be the leader, but the facts really don't support it yet. If you look at the productivity figures, 20% of the workforce is producing 30% of the wealth in industry, and that's mostly stuff like subcontract production for Scandinavian companies or for Finnish companies. So this is the most productive, in economic terms, segment of the economy. Services, 76% of the workforce is producing 66% of the wealth. IT falls in there. There's no single IT company, at least there wasn't when I looked this up, in the top 20 companies in Estonia. Those that we talk about, of course, like TransferWise, Skype, Pipedrive, many of these have set up their bigger operations outside the country. But still the top export is machinery and electric goods. So I think the E thing is great, but it's not the answer. People are leaving or they just get old. This is Andrei Fostov, who says that Estonia is becoming an old folks' home. He likes to be dramatic, but that's not totally inaccurate. And then Jürgen Ligi. Do you follow Jürgen Ligi? He's like Estonia's, he's a cranky old man, but he's not that old. He's quite smart, and he's usually the one who's willing to say what everybody else is thinking. And he thinks that the best case scenario is that in year 2040, we will have 70,000 fewer workers than we have today. Worst case scenario, 130,000 fewer. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you consider that if the population of Estonia is 1.3 million, take away pensioners, take away those too young to work, take away those unable to work, take away the public sector, teachers, anyone supported by tax dollars. And that starts to look pretty frightening. So it's not such a rosy financial picture. And finally, poverty is not insignificant. This is the average wage per hour. Right now in Estonia, I think the monthly figure is 900 and some. Maybe it's right at 1,000, but that's brutto, so take away your personal income tax. My mother-in-law, she earns less than 2 euros an hour. Now don't feel too sorry for her, she has things okay. She lives in an apartment at her daughter's house. She also has a pension, it's slightly lower because she's working. And she works in a kindergarten, and she enjoys doing that. But 2 euros an hour, it doesn't leave her feeling all that dignified when the check comes, or I guess we don't use checks, but when the money moves. I think I had another thing. Oh, this is a really interesting guy, and if you're ever looking for future speakers, it's a Dutchman named Piet Boerving. He has a fascinating personal story, but his professional side, he started the Eesti Toidupank, the food bank. And he has a very different view about poverty. And he disagrees with most people in government, and his information comes firsthand. And he's a really fascinating guy. But anyway, just for future reference. A couple of economic conclusions that after what I call the achievement decade, meaning when the West sort of said, here's what you need to do, A, B, C, and D, you need to win these merit badges, which Estonia did in flying colors. It joined NATO, EU, OECD, all that whole list of clubs. But it appears now to be rudderless. We're sort of witnessing a generation shift, I think, in government, and we're sort of caught in between. This has been sort of floated as what the objective might be, just another boring EU country. A few years ago, Andrus Ansip said we should be in the top 5 wealthiest of Europe, but he kind of got laughed at for that, and the statistics really don't make it look like that's going to happen anytime soon. But my point is that nobody really has a vision except these E people. And the E people, this idea of, you heard about the E-residency that they want to give, which is a pretty cool idea. And right now what it means is basically that if you're on the board of directors of a company, you don't have to FedEx things around to make decisions, that you can go online and digitally sign everything and things will move faster. But maybe they're the pioneers and the leaders in that, but not a lot of people have followed. Because if your strategy is let's be Delaware, well, Delaware, which is the state, I think the #1 location in the world for corporations to incorporate, it's not just because of no state income tax. It's not just because of tax breaks. It's because of a special court system they have to deal with corporate law and a whole range of things. And so right now what we have in Estonia is really these E people, Ilves, Taavi Kotkas, who are really taking the lead on this. And I think it's a good idea, but it remains to be seen who's going to follow. Because the E thing in itself, well, it's just an E thing. The second thing that's kind of debated is who's a real Estonian. So second issue, the first one was economics. The second one, who's a real Estonian? The Russian-speaking Estonians, 400,000. Well, they don't all speak Estonian, let's be honest. But, you know, when I came to Estonia, the first thing people said to me, I would say something like, tere, you know. That's all I knew after a week was tere. And I didn't understand anything. And then Estonians would say, oh, kui andekas sa oled. Mõned on siin elanud 50 aastat ja nad ei oska ühtegi sõna. Well, that's just not true. A lot of Russians really do speak pretty good Estonian. Yet, not because they're discriminated against, but I think that may be in part, but because the cultures are just so very different, that the two don't really mix that much. The New York Times described it this way. Their headline in an article by a writer named Clifford Levy was, Estonia raises pencils to erase Russian, or maybe erase Russian language. Well, I think that's way over the top. And we can't really blame Clifford Levy because writers don't write headlines, their editors do. But more or less, that's a fair summation of his thesis. I actually took him on and published something in Estonian Public Broadcasting, which was cited, linked to by The Economist. I disagreed with this. And then Mr. Levy, who won a Pulitzer Prize and reminded me of that, really, I still have the email exchange. It's quite funny, but basically we went round and round, and then I finally said, hey, look, if you write for the New York Times, I bet you have pretty thick skin, so we could have a beer sometime when you're in Estonia. He never called. In my personal experience, Russians are, in fact, discriminated against. There's a couple instances I can tell you about. When I was starting Forbes Estonia, part of my job was to staff it with journalists. Estonian journalists, for an Estonian language publication, they weren't so eager to come to work for it. The reason was that publications fail all the time. So if you're a pretty good journalist, that was something of a risk to come work for a new publication. So the good ones weren't really interested. So I went looking elsewhere. And I had a stack of CVs on my desk. The managing director of Forbes comes in and starts rifling through them, and he says, well, these are Russians. And I said, well, some of them have, I said, I don't know about their citizenship. I said, but some of them do have Russian last names. I said, but every single one of these did his or her diploma work in the Estonian language. I said, and it's my opinion, if this person can write a master's thesis in Estonian, can probably do an article for Forbes. Well, he didn't like that. But luckily, he didn't have any power. And the big secret, the money for Forbes comes from Russia, but don't tell anyone. But a second one was there's an MTU, or a not-for-profit that I'm associated with in Estonia. I'm not on the board, but I used to be. It's run by a Ukrainian lady, and the organization exists thanks only to her, because she's so dynamic. Otherwise, it would have gone kaput. But she was told by the board that she had to hire, her next person had to be an Estonian. Well, everyone in the office speaks fluent Estonian without an accent. They don't speak some silly Estonian like mine. They speak täitsa puhtalt. It's nice. But they have the wrong last names. And, I don't think this happens every day, all the time, and everywhere. But the point is, it does happen, and often we pretend it doesn't. And I don't know how widespread it is, but all I can say is I've seen it. And so there is some credibility to this. So what's a real Estonian? I don't know. But I think there's too few Estonians really to start dividing them up into little groups. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today. The good news and the bad news, I think the bad news is the generation in power is not going to give an olive branch. And I understand that. And you might be thinking, oh, well, American guy, it's very easy for you to say this. Your family wasn't deported. And of course, that's true. Whatever Irish background, I have even no idea what drove my family to the United States. But they would say once you're in the U.S., in 5 minutes you're an American, because you forget completely about your history. I suppose that's all true. Jürgen Ligi said the other day, or a few months ago, there was a political debate. A businessman raised a hand and said, well, Mr. Ligi, let's talk about immigration, because I need some scientists, or I need some IT specialists. And Ligi answered him, he said, well, 40% of Estonia is already immigrants. I think we've got enough. And I'm not judging him, but he's a man who says what everybody's thinking, or people of his generation are thinking. And I think that is the reality. The good news is that the 20-somethings really seem not to care. They don't even know. These kids speak amazing English. If you haven't been to Estonia in a while, their English, it just dazzles you. Even like 70-year-old women who are, working in a kiosk or something, who never spoke a word of English until they took that job, are learning English. And, maybe not terribly fluently, but enough. And it's really amazing. It's an amazing transformation to witness. Anyway, these young guys, they're not so interested in who suffered more. And the reason I use that, do you know these people called the tujuurikkujad? Okay, well, these guys, this Mert Avandi and Ott Sepp, they're starting to bring up these topics that really weren't discussed before. They did this parody of an exhibit about the Titanic, except instead of the parody was they used the sinking of the Estonia. And they did this one where it's like a music video of singing about Estonians and their lot in life is to suffer and how we've suffered more and we've suffered better than everybody else. And I just point that out because for the first time, at least in the time I've been in Estonia, this is now an object for humor. And they're not running around on the day of deportations and doing it or anything. But a lot of people don't like them doing it. But it's interesting that the topic is raised. And I think this is a generational thing. I think it's because of these 20-something kids, this new generation coming in, and maybe they're not reverent enough, maybe they're not remembering history well enough. One criticism is that they don't speak Russian. That, you're 25 years old and you don't speak Russian. Well, how are you going to know what your neighbor's up to? And so they Yeah, maybe they have forgotten too much. The third observation is that Estonia is, if we call it a fight for market share, or a fight for visibility in the world market of, hey, we're here, we're Estonia, I think it's a bit overestimated. For the most part, the culture doesn't travel that much. We all know who is Arvo Pärt, we all know who is Tõnu Kaljuste, but the bad news is, and this is from someone who works a little bit in the classical music business, nobody cares about classical music except, 5 people. So Arvo Pärt, who is sort of one niche within the classical music world, is not really that well known. When you look at the nation's ability to broadcast its own message, RT is Russia Today. Their budget for next year, or for 2015, is 300 million euros. Not bad, huh? I think only China spends more. This is Eesti Rahvusringhääling, the ERR News, which is the English language arm. Their budget is 24,000 for the English language stuff. This pays like 2 guys. And this year they decided they would fire all the native English speakers. So they're not going to edit this stuff anymore. So there's really no ability to get the message out there. So the messages that reach you, a lot of this is credit to Ilves and Taavi Kotkas and the E people who go out there and cheerlead. But it's not part of any organized effort at that level. And social media, a lot of, I don't have to go on ad nauseum about this because I think a lot of scientists are writing about this, about the echo chamber effect, that basically social media is, we're talking to our friends who are talking back to us, and it just bounces around. So when we see things through a Google feed or a Facebook or something, we have the impression that that is more prominent or more visible than it actually is. Now, the slide about you. I think it's not easy being a foreign Estonian. This is just what I've gathered over the years. These are 5 observations. The Kodueestlased think you think they're commies. To put that in the most blunt terms. That you think that they've been ruined at some level. The Kodueestlased think you're arrogant and that you have all the answers and are clueless about the real Estonia. The Kodueestlased think you're all incredibly rich and that your lives are incredibly easy. This is changing somewhat, by the way. But they think, oh, of course, you're smart. You're Estonians. And so when you went abroad, you were terribly successful. Some think you didn't suffer as much as they suffered, and therefore your voice counts less. I think that's changing some too. There's a lot of books now. She's a real troublemaker. She's a friend of mine, and I say this to her face so I can say it to you. Maybe you know Ilvi Juakanen. Okay. Wow, Ilvi likes to stir the pot. Ilvi published a book or edited a book called Carrying Linda's Stones, which had some really great stories about the lives of Väliseestlased. And I think that was kind of an important book, important that was published. And that the message gets out there that, you all have some pretty interesting and sometimes tragic stories, and how families were split up. And I've lived a relatively spoiled life. But I think that was an important book, and I think that's maybe starting to change. But at the same time, despite these first 4, there's nobody faster to celebrate the success of a Väliseestlane than a Kodueestlane. If somebody somewhere does something pretty cool, the Kodueestlased are the first people to tell you about it. Like, I didn't need to come here to know that Maclean's magazine has an Estonian guy that's senior staff, maybe was top editor, senior executive editor. I don't need to come here to know that, because they'll tell me about that in Estonia. And they do. They're very proud of that. Even if you're only a tiny, tiny bit Estonian, like there's this guy named Tyler Brule, or Brule, I don't know how to pronounce it. He started a magazine called Wallpaper. I think his grandmother is Estonian, or maybe his mother, okay. Well, they will drag you and tell you about these people. So your successes, even though maybe they don't let on when you come to visit, oh yeah, veel üks kord tuleb mingi onu Ameerikast või Kanadast. Las tema maksab õhtusöögi eest. But they are so proud of that. And I think prior to 1991, probably as Kodues or Väliseestlane, maybe your agenda was clearer. It seems to me, I could be wrong here, but it seems to me you were all about survival, keep the culture alive. And you had this Metsuliko, you had these Eestimajad. I remember an Eestimaja in Chicago. You had this Esto Fest or whatever. I haven't been to an Esto. But you did serious re-independence work as well. Even in periods, I can't believe in the 70s you really believed that Estonia was going to get independence. Yet you were protesting. I know for a fact in the US that foreign Estonians were constantly knocking on congressmen's and senators' doors to remind them that Estonia exists. And this was important work that, quite frankly, paid off, maybe to everyone's surprise. But it seemed that back in those days, maybe life was simpler for you. And from the outside, at least from my point of view, it seems like now that your future's kind of complicated. I see that what's happening with the Eestimajad. I know the one in Chicago, they rent it out for weddings and stuff. Are there that many Estonians in that community that are going to keep that alive? I don't know. The status of the language. I don't know how many of you speak it with your children, but I know a lot of people in the United States, Estonians, my generation, who don't speak it. And maybe that's a more normal thing in the United States. Canada is a country that, as I understand it, works harder to preserve many cultures. Whereas in the US we say, you know, get your hamburger over there and your 500-liter Diet Coke and let's go. So I don't know. But it seems to me that that might not be thriving, the language. In the US, many of the Estonian language speakers are over 75. And then it seems to me, I don't know, but is the foreign Estonian world community, is it highly organized? I don't know. It is? Do the Americans talk to the Canadians? Do the Canadians talk to the Swedes? What's that?
They're having a meeting this week with
Okay. Anyway, from what I know about the American ones, they don't seem so organized, or at least, are they all blowing in the same direction? I don't know. But anyway, if you happen to be looking for new ideas, that seems kind of depressing, all those facts about Estonia. I show you them only because they're true, but I'm an optimist. I wouldn't be in Estonia if I didn't think it had a future. I wouldn't be there if it was like what I saw in 1992, which was a complete mess. It wouldn't be a place I'd want to raise my kid. I want him to grow up in a place where a policeman isn't some scumbag that you have to avoid because you're going to have to pay him a bribe, which in some cases that was 1992. But now Estonia, it's really, I'm optimistic anyway. You can't bribe a police officer in Estonia, by the way, not for a traffic offense. And if you have a huge sack of money, maybe you can bribe one, but chances are you'll get caught because they tap their phones or their microphones and their radios. And it really is a healthy society, in my opinion. But if you were looking for something to do, if you had some resources to engage, what might you do? Well, what might this one Estonia, I worked in advertising, so I have to have a catchy phrase for everything. So what might this one Estonia look like? Well, if you could gather all these people, there's 900,000 Väliseestlased, right? There's 400,000 Russian-speaking Estonians. Well, let's say they all learn it. How many foreign Estonians are there? Is that too high? Really? Even if we count all the kids and grandkids who would like to consider themselves Estonians? Okay, now you're depressing me. I thought it was higher. I think there's more than this, though. I think we can safely say I'm way under the mark here, what they're calling Estonian expats. People like Sten Tomkivi. You know, Sten Tomkivi's living in where? Silicon Valley. There's all sorts of guys like him. If we count the turkey pluckers, too, in Ireland or something, then we go way up. If we count the guys, very talented builders and construction workers, if we count them, it goes way up. By some estimates, there's 100,000 of them in Finland. Is that true? I don't know. But I'm a guy who earns most of my income by doing magazines for Finnish corporations, and I have to take the ferry boat all the time. It's full of construction workers. I don't know if that proves anything, but and I'm willing to bet you that there are more than 100,000 foreigners like me. And by foreigners like me, what I mean is somebody who's been touched by Estonia, somebody who has an affinity for Estonia, but no blood ties. And there's a lot of people around like that, I think. Ilves has started a group, or he didn't start a group. There was a businessman who started it and stepped back after some scandal, but Ilves now sort of leads it. It's called Friends of Estonia. Maybe some of you are members. And it's kind of like, it's a good idea. It's an investors club, basically. People who have invested or might potentially invest, and you come to the president's garden and drink some whiskey and tell stories, and everybody feels good. But the real Friends of Estonia are out there in, I think, huge numbers. But there's really kind of no way to whip them all into a frenzy. So as a Swedish friend of mine says, what if we all blew in the same direction? What if we were all acting on the same agenda? And what if Estonia were inclusive instead of exclusive? You may disagree with me, but Estonia seems very inclusive to me. One thing people used to say to me when I first arrived is they said, you know, you may think we're a country, but we're not. We're a club. And in a way, that's kind of true. A really big club that's really well organized with its own borders. But it is a very clubby mentality. If Ilvi, I mentioned her before, if she were here, she would stand up and say, and those goddamned Rotarians still won't let women in. And she's right. But what I would say is, what if in the manner of like everyone being Irish on St. Patrick's Day? You know, we all dress in green, and then we drink too much. In Chicago, they dye the river green, and then they vomit in it or something. You know, the Irish, they don't handle their liquor too well, I guess. But what if there were some way for people like me who aren't Estonian and will never have Estonian citizenship? What if there were some way for us to be Estonian? Maybe even more than just one day a year. But I think that would be kind of cool. What if we had, this is the Martin Luther King moment here, what if we had like a movement or a campaign to unite these people who are interested in the same thing that Estonians are interested in? And maybe your list would be different or better, but I think Estonians are pretty much individualists. They like freedom, independent thinking. They love nature. And do they? Sports? Okay. Yeah. And resourcefulness. I once spoke to a group of businessmen and I said resourcefulness, and they said, efficiency. And I said, sorry, but no, not by any measure at this moment. But if you go to a talu, you see the most amazing things. You see the cleverest solutions. And I'm not just talking about like those coat hooks that they make on a tree branches. Maybe now that's kind of quaint, you know. But I think in Soviet times you just couldn't go to the store and get some coat hooks. But, you know, these country houses, for me that's the real Estonia. Tallinn, you know, all capital cities, like their reach exceeds their grasps. They're all a bit off. But wow, go to the countryside and you see some pretty amazing things. And I think Estonians have this resourcefulness. Maybe the new generation will lose it. Maybe they'll just be these IT junkies. Like Tavi was sort of laughing at me because I don't know how to do anything tech. But what if we could all rally around those things? But I think that this idea, if you buy the premise that maybe we could all get together, I don't think that this leadership can come from Estonia, at least not now. But, you know, this is just Canada and the US. I don't really know about the other countries. But, you know, all these organizations, you know, what if they're, I assume maybe they don't all get along. They all have different agendas, different people. But what if they shared a couple of items in common that we all agree to do this as part of our activities for this year? I think that could be pretty powerful, especially if we do my St. Patrick's Day thing. So I don't know how you would do that, and here I'm just making this up because I don't know anything about Esto. But what if at one of these meetings where you all get together, you agreed to have some sort of political component, and together you sort of chart the future for Estonia. Now that sounds really pretentious, doesn't it? We're going to chart the future for Estonia, and then we're going to go over to those Väliseestlased and say, hey, boys, this is how it's done. But I think some lobbying, you know, if all those other people got together, man, I think Estonians, Väliseestlased, would be flattered and might put their resources behind it, and whatever that might be. I hear someone groan, so. Anyway, that's my pitch. You may think the idea is not so great, and maybe when I'm on the plane going home, I'll start to think, yeah, that was kind of stupid. But maybe something I said stuck with you, and I really didn't want to fly all the way over here just to, I don't know, talk to you about sult or Estonian food or something. And so that's it. Are there any questions?
Let's first give Scott a hand.
Thanks.
A lot of food for thought. I'm sure there's more than a few questions. The only thing I would ask is wait for the mic so that everybody can hear, and we can record you for posterity.
Thank you, Scott. Good presentation and really interesting observations. From your perspective, why do you think the EU hasn't balanced out prices and wages so that it isn't so tempting for Estonians to leave the country to go to other places?
You mean in the form of like some sort of wage subsidies, and has that been done in other European countries? I'm not an expert, I'm really asking.
Yeah, I haven't read any good articles on that, whether it's the free market system or government subsidized, but I
Well-
balance and equalize both sides?
Well, first I would say, I don't know what the EU could actually legally do, would be my first question. But secondly, I would say that, like, I was just on a work assignment in Portugal and Spain. And I met a lot of people. And despite some of these things that don't make Estonia look so great, you know, Spain still has youth unemployment of, it was something like 30% or even higher some years ago. And now, what is it now? Like 25%? And in Portugal, they've got just young people fleeing, you know? So, you know, I don't think Estonia is necessarily in that bad of a situation. It's just that it's so small, everybody worries, are they going to come back? Because they are welcome so many places. I mean, if you got that passport, you can work anywhere. And plus, even the non-EU countries like Australia, and Jan told me today that Canada does it also. If you're under 35, you can come for a year and extend another year. I know lots of Estonians who have gone to Australia. And many stay. Also, if you're young, you know, you want to have a career, what can you do in Tallinn? You work for Swedbank or Skype? Yeah. Sorry, I don't have a good answer.
Hi, I just wondered what you thought about this concept. I keep seeing the young people, my grandchildren, and my own children, which are more your age, but they seem to have more of an attitude of international. They don't seem to care where they end up, where they're going to go to work, as long as they can work in a way that they're comfortable and interested or whatever. They don't seem to have, oh, I have to be Canadian, I have to be Estonian, I have to be Greek, whatever. They don't think that way. They seem to think that the world is for them as a unit, anywhere.
What do you think about that?
I think it's true. But I just wonder, then it becomes a real issue for countries like Estonia, small countries that can't really lose all their young people all over the world.
Well, I think it's one way to say that and maybe feel that way. It's a completely different thing to physically pick yourself up and go somewhere thousands of miles away and live for very long. So maybe in part it's a lot of talk about this is the new economy, it's the internet age, and I don't know. But I don't think I have a little boy, he's 5, okay. Like any good parent, I've already started to worry about will he want to go to university and where will he want to go. And I mean, in the end, I'll just be happy if he's healthy and I don't care what he does. But, you know, yeah, I kind of worry. I think what's he going to do in Estonia? If he's not an entrepreneur at age 21, and I certainly was, I wasn't that mature. At age 21, I was probably an idiot. Well, maybe not an idiot, but I wasn't very mature. And so for people like me who maybe need to go work a few years somewhere, I don't know. I see him probably leaving. And what to do about that, maybe the solution is that Estonia needs to be more welcoming to someone to replace him. And it's not always. The legislation is not so super progressive. In defense, what the politicians will tell you, and they're right, is that Estonia has not been able to fill its, like, what you call white-collar quotas in the past couple of years. So in other words, they're willing to take 100 engineers or something, and they've made it easy. All you have to do is come in and wave or something. And they haven't been able to fill those quotas. So that's an important thing to discuss as well. But I would say maybe we just have to welcome his replacement.
I agree that younger people are going elsewhere to find jobs. But I really strongly see my own sons who have gone elsewhere. China is pretty far. That's where my older son is teaching English.
Wow.
In Jinan. And I think his self-identity is nevertheless tied to the values, the Estonian values that we have. And I think that self-identity and that need to have a value system that's coherent, well-established, plus that slightly exotic appeal of being something quite a small country. I think those things are very important, and they become increasingly so because young people especially want to separate themselves from the masses. So I'd like to bring that idea and simply add as well that I like very much your idea of Estonians getting together and talking and let the road lead where it will, but there needs to be more cohesiveness because we are a small bunch of people.
How many years has your son been in China? And does he say he plans to come back, or is that going to be home?
He and his girlfriend are appreciate being appreciated there. The management style is the pits, but the parents and the students can be fabulous. They are looking for more contracts, but the future is what it is. Who knows?
Well, I never planned to stay in Estonia. It just happened. So maybe he'll come home.
Yeah, Scott, just carrying on with the migration or all the people leaving Estonia, like, and you should like about 100,000 or whatever that number might be. Couple of things. One is it important for those people to come back to Estonia at some time? And I guess what I think about are or at least some of what I think about are these initiatives like Talendid Koju, which was a total bust. I think there's another one that's on right now. And I guess it's like the question of, well, once these people have gone, will they ever come back? And the second part of it is, you look at the communities here that have evolved over like the last 50, 60 years. It was we were essentially political refugees, the children of political refugees. We weren't economic refugees, like which I think is the case with the people that have left, like over the last like 20 years, and I guess talk about this feeling of Estonian like nationalism, call it what you will. The people that have left more recently over the last 20 years, do they have that same sense of nationalism? I guess I'm just interested in your take on that. And can they feel good about being Estonians, or have they just basically said, hey, like, I'm out of here, it's not giving me what I want?
I don't know. It'd probably be better if... I was speaking to Tavi earlier. I don't know if he's still in the room, but he said he's been here 8 years. So, oh, there he is, back there. I think I'm not qualified to answer that question. You know, it's those Estonians who have left and are working abroad. I don't have so much interaction with them, and you know, right now you mentioned the second program. What that is EAS, which is this government-funded and EU-funded organization to promote Estonia and gather investment. They're spending 70,000 euros to try to attract Finnish IT workers to come to Estonia. So this is like Talendid Koju Part 2. And they're getting a lot of criticism for it. But yeah, you're right, the first one was a bust, but you know what can you do? You just got to wish them good luck when they go abroad. I mean, I wanted to go abroad when I was, 12, I suppose. I lived in Kansas. I thought what do they say? It's not the end of the earth, but you can see it from here. So, I mean, I understand. And, I guess power to them. And some will come back and some won't.
Scott, I truly like your optimism, and I've seen in my life people like you, several. They are mostly Americans in Estonia.
They're mostly
Americans in
Okay.
Estonia. Well,
We're generally optimistic.
yeah, well, well, perhaps it's North American patented optimism. But what I still listening to you, I was thinking on several questions. First of all, my counter argument is perhaps do the Estonians in Estonia care about your one Estonia concept, kodueestlased? This is first. Because you know better than I that Estonia is not united, even the kodueestlased are not united. Estonia is full of Tädi-Maali stories, and you mentioned on your slide that there are every fifth is on the line of poverty. And this is my first question. Second is actually my hesitation. Well, I share your optimism, but I have still some hesitations regarding how you call them Russian-speaking Estonians. Well, I guess our community here will reject this kind of term. They don't like it, like the kodueestlased don't like it. They call it the venelased, just so. I agree with you because serving Tartu University some 20 years ago, I remember a couple of guys, Russian guys coming from Narva, well, highly interested in to get the higher education in political sciences and history. They were fluent in Russian, of course, poor in Estonian. They wanted to go to UK in order to learn better English. I warned them that you guys, if you want to share your next coming years in Estonia, you have to learn Estonian and be better than Estonian-speaking Estonians. They disappeared anyway. The question is that I do believe that these two communities are not sharing your optimism on one Estonia. Because I agree with open-minded Jürgen Ligi, but you remember also what Jürgen Ligi did against the Minister of Education, Yevgeny Ossinovsky. And the Ossinovsky's case is a litmus test for Estonian society, in my opinion. If you don't know about the educational background of Ossinovsky, this is UK, London University, highest grades, and the Estonians nevertheless disliked it. Ossinovskys, Fostovs, and even I know that some people here, when the Tiit Aleksejev visited us recently, they asked, who's the guy actually? Is a Russian? So this is what the Estonians really think, but they are not speaking it out.
Okay. The first question, do I think kodueestlased would support it? No. But I think Estonians are some of the most practical people on earth. And if they see value in something, they'll do it. So that's why I said I don't think leadership could come from there for the reasons you just described, Ligi, Ossinovsky, etc. But if it came from somewhere else, if it started small, if it had achievable objectives that were visible, well, maybe. But if you said, well, I've got an extra $5 million in my pocket, Scott, and I really want to fund this One Estonia thing, but I want you to be managing director. Well, I'm not sure I'd sign on. Not that it couldn't be done, but one thing that I've recognized in the time I've spent in Estonia is that how truly different my culture is from the Estonian culture, and my way of thinking from the Estonian way of thinking. And I say that, and I should point out that Estonians generally, well, I was called once kodustatud imperialist, domesticated imperialist, yeah? And that, you know, the years of Estonia had sort of made me eat fewer hamburgers. And, you know, even that said, certainly Estonia has greatly influenced me in my way of thinking. There's some topics I can't even discuss with friends in the United States, like go try to say that socialized medicine is not a terrible idea. That, hey, you know, it works in Canada, it works in other places. No, they don't. We can't talk about that. But, yeah. But yeah, I guess I'm an optimist because I have to be. Just because there's too much depressing stuff out there, especially right now. So, you know, would I, if you want to fund this, would I be a part of it? You bet. Would I drop everything else to do it? No. So I think you make really good points.
I really enjoyed this, and I think there's a lot of issues here that would be great to talk on, you know, like have debates and things about in our sororities or, you know, get-togethers that we have. It's always good to hear a different perspective, and I think you did bring a bit of a different perspective. But what I'm going to say now has nothing to do with, or maybe I'm curious to, because you are so frank and it's interesting to hear your comments, can you say something about what they're thinking about the Russian situation? I mean, the borders and the tanks and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Because you seem to have, you know, sort of your thumb on, you know, sort of the pulse a little bit. What does that say to you?
Well, I don't know. You know, if you read the papers, you know as much as I do. But my personal opinion is that people are nervous. Recently, Ilves made a statement that, oh, the Russians could be here in 4 hours or something like that. This made a lot of people really angry. Vostov, if you follow him, he had a lot of really actually funny things to say about this too. But the point was, wait a minute, this is our president who stood up only months prior and said, our nation is more secure than it has ever been in its history. And then he says, oh, they can be, then he, according to them, he changes his tune and says, well, now they can be here in 4 hours. Well, understandably, I think he's doing what he can to make an argument for a permanent NATO base in Estonia. I don't know how Estonians feel about this. My wife thinks it's a terrible idea. She and I disagree on this. I mean, I don't know that we need 1,000 Americans living in Estonia. I mean, that'll be worse than like British bachelor party in the old town. But they're my people. I can make fun of them. But yeah, I mean, people are nervous. I honestly went to the bank and upped my limits. You know, I think, you know, I've thought about it. I mean, especially when you hear stories like yours, you know. You read a book about some of the things that you went through. And I've always thought, that happens to other people. You know, but when all this whole mess started, I started to think that, wow, I could be on a boat with my wife and kid. So, yeah, Putin's completely unpredictable. Well, maybe he is predictable if you're kind of above the fray and cold and calculating and you're a great analyst. But is he crazy? I don't know. But certainly, yeah, everybody's nervous. What's that?
Do you have a bag packed?
No, I haven't gone that far.
What about the neighbors? Does anyone talk about that? What's our escape plan?
Well, I don't think my example is certainly not representative because I have another home waiting for me. I do have some, I'm not sure Estonians would even think about it in the same terms. I don't know. I haven't heard anyone say, oh, I'm frightened enough that, you know, we're packing a bag. not that extreme. I have two friends, they're American investors in Latvia, really big investors. They're the largest debt customer of Swedbank in the Baltics. And what they do is they do lease buybacks. I think that's what they're called. And, or no, buy, lease back. So they would buy the property under a store and rent the property back to the store. So they own most of the property under the Baltic supermarkets. And I asked these guys, because they've got a lot to lose. I said, are you guys worried? And you know what they said to me? They're American guys, so you know they didn't have any like Latvian sentimentality or anything or practicality, but they just said, Russians respect property rights. Now, I don't think they were talking about your generation. I think they were talking about Crimea and what's happened there, that the businesses that were in Crimea, at least according to these guys, have not been nationalized and taken from people, but allowed to continue to operate. Now, I haven't made a study of that, so I can't tell you if that's true. But that's what they said. Russians respect property rights.
I'm not sure that this is very valid, but I was thinking of you because my son left in 1989 to Cambodia, married there, has a business there, and has 2 children, and now is returning only because his wife wants a Canadian citizenship because his children are coming here to university and school. And I'm just thinking to myself, wait till your kids are going to go to university and you'll have to start thinking about where are they going to go and where is their homeland?
Well, mine is, I think he's going to be as stubborn as his mother. So I probably won't honestly have much to say. But I've got a cabin on a river, trout river in Arkansas. So I'm ready to come back when he does. Because I really miss the United States. The U.S. has its problems, but it's my culture. And one thing I've really enjoyed in Toronto, which is, very true of the United States, is you can strike up a conversation with anybody. And there's this interaction between human beings that doesn't take place everywhere in Europe, and certainly doesn't take place as a rule in Estonia. Although that is changing. And there are certain areas where you go, like if you come back for a visit, go to Telliskivi, eat at the restaurants, and wow, what an amazing place, and what really interesting people congregate there. And but that's what I really miss about the North American culture, if we can call it that.
A couple more questions.
I don't know how to express this in a question, but I'll just make a comment that it seems to me that I grew up with one foot in each culture, one in the Canadian culture and one the Estonian one. And what I observe in the Estonian culture is that when there's a time, we are certainly have our individualism right at the tip. But when there's a time to stand together, you've seen the film, Eresidency, you've seen how people will stand together. And I think that that's something that I don't observe in my Canadian side. I go to the Unitarian Fellowship. Unitarians have their own opinions, but they have a really, 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 really hard time ever standing together on anything. It's as though their identity is too much tied up with that kind of independence. But again, you said that Estonians are very practical. I'd like to throw that in as an aspect that we can work with, and that will be it's increasingly important in our society. It's important for safety, it's important for democracy, all those principles that everybody in this room, we wouldn't be here without wanting those and living those principles.
Mm-hmm. Good observation.
Perhaps I have one last question, Scott.
Fire away.
The lady brought up a very good point in saying that laulupidu is one event that brings Estonians together. Maybe not all the classes that you had identified, but any thoughts on how we could maybe expand on laulupidu to make it that one special event for all Estonians to, maybe that's a first step towards a one Estonia.
Yeah, maybe invite all those other groups on the list to join the parade. Actually, my two favorite times in Estonia are, the song festival's okay, I like it, but I love the song festival parade because all those people walk by, and if you scream something like, "Elagu Tartu meeskoor," they all have to yell back. And you can just sit on a hillside and make them shout all day long, and they really love it. And the other time you can always engage in Estonian is on New Year's. You walk around, I live in Pirita, and nobody says hello to each other if you don't know each other. And, my wife says I'm nuts because, well, why would you want someone to say hello to you if you don't know them? It's like one time when I worked for the Tartu Maavalitsus, I asked someone, I was looking for some place. I said, well, where is this? And she said, she was an older woman, and she said, well, if you don't know where it is, then you obviously have no business being there. But on New Year's, if you say, "Headut aastat," you always get an answer. Or the other thing, I guess the third occasion or third instance, if someone is working and you say "Joudu," then they will always answer "Tarvis." And so I find myself desperately seeking these human interactions, But, yeah, I know what you mean.
One last question.
It's not so much a question as a maybe a statement to clarify, I think, why Estonians have a very hard time of discussing and debating things, is that they have gone through multiple occupations, and they had to fight, against different regimes, and they had to keep quiet so that somebody else could not listen even to their thoughts. And that is so inbred in them that they have a hard time to trust anybody.
Yeah.
And that is the basic, I think, problem.
I'm sure you're
An interesting
right,
observation.
then, yeah.
Anyway, Scott, thank you very much for certainly a very thought-provoking evening with your observations and your wit.
Well, thank you for having me.
And your good looks. Anyway.
Thanks.
Good luck on that next fishing trip. And I want to thank the audience as well, because I thought it was a very engaging, intelligent discussion, the questions, the observations that we had this evening. So I think you should applaud yourselves as well.